When Ryan and his mother left for a luxurious family holiday, I was left behind to care for my ailing father-in-law, Walter. At first, I was overwhelmed, frustrated, and drowning in the responsibilities they had so easily brushed off. But what began as an exhausting burden turned into an unexpected journey of discovery and connection. As Walter opened up about his past, his regrets, and the love he'd sacrificed, I found myself deeply moved by his vulnerability. His final days became a profound lesson in living authentically and cherishing the time we have. Little did I know, those quiet, poignant moments with Walter would forever change my perspective on love, duty, and the courage to reclaim my own life. The morning began with hurried footsteps and the sound of luggage being wheeled down the stairs. My husband, Ryan, and his mother, Clara, were leaving for a long-awaited family holiday, a week-long getaway in a beachside resort. As I stood in the doorway, watching them load the car, a pang of frustration bubbled within me. "I wish you could come with us, but you know how it is," Ryan said, giving me a half-hearted smile as he adjusted his sunglasses. "How it is," I repeated under my breath, hiding my irritation. I glanced toward the living room, where Ryan's father, Walter, was seated, his frail body propped up with pillows. He was battling advanced Parkinson's disease, and his care had become increasingly demanding. Ryan and Clara insisted they needed a break, leaving me to take care of Walter. I didn't protest outwardly, but I couldn't shake the resentment brewing inside me. Was this how it was going to be? Me stuck here, while they basked in luxury. As they drove off, Walter called out from his chair, "Don't worry, dear. I won't be too much trouble." I forced a smile. "Of course not, Walter. We'll manage just fine." The first day was exhausting. Walter's medications, meal preparations, and constant monitoring left me no time for myself. I tried to keep my spirits up, reminding myself that this was temporary. But the loneliness crept in as the hours passed. By evening, I found myself sitting across from Walter at the dinner table. He struggled to lift his fork, his hand trembling violently. I gently took the fork from him and helped him eat. "Thank you," he said softly, his eyes meeting mine. "It's nothing," I replied, but the gratitude in his expression struck a chord. That night, as I prepared him for bed, he whispered, "You're kinder than I deserve, you know." I paused, unsure of what he meant. Walter had always been a reserved man, often overshadowed by Clara's dominating personality. I didn't know much about him beyond the surface level. Over the next few days, Walter and I settled into a routine. Despite the challenges, I began to notice small things about him. The way his eyes lit up when I played his favorite classical music, his subtle sense of humor, and the stories he told about his youth. One afternoon, as I massaged his stiff hands, he asked, "Do you know how I met Clara?" I shook my head, curious. "She was a firecracker," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Charmed everyone in the room. I thought I'd won the lottery marrying her." His expression turned wistful, but somewhere along the way, I lost myself. The vulnerability in his voice caught me off guard. Walter rarely spoke about his feelings, and this glimpse into his inner world made me see him in a new light. "You're still here," I said gently. "Thanks to you," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. On the fourth day, while cleaning his room, I stumbled upon a wooden box tucked away in his closet. It was old and worn, with a faded brass latch. I hesitated before opening it, feeling as if I were intruding on something private. Inside, I found a collection of letters, photographs, and a small leather-bound journal. The photos were of a younger Walter, smiling beside a woman who wasn't Clara. Confused, I opened one of the letters. The words were raw and emotional, written by Walter to a woman named Eleanor. "I think of you every day, even though life took us in different directions. I wish I'd been brave enough to choose love over duty." My breath hitched. This was a side of Walter I never knew, a man who had once loved deeply, but had made sacrifices that haunted him to this day. When I confronted him about the letters later that evening, he didn't deny it. Instead, he looked at me with a mix of sorrow and relief. "Eleanor was the love of my life," he admitted, "but my family expected me to marry Clara. She was the right choice. Do you regret it?" I asked, hesitantly. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gazed out the window, lost in thought. "I regret not being true to myself," he said finally. "But regret won't change the past." The conversation stayed with me long after I'd helped him to bed. Walter's honesty made me reflect on my own life. Was I being true to myself, or was I simply going through the motions, prioritizing others' needs over my own? The next morning, I decided to take Walter outside for some fresh air. With great effort, I helped him into his wheelchair and wheeled him into the garden. His face lit up as the sunlight warmed his skin. "This feels like freedom," he said, closing his eyes. As we sat there, he began to tell me more stories about his childhood, his dreams, and the life he wished he'd lived. It was as if the fresh air had unlocked a part of him that had been dormant for years. "You're the first person who's really listened to me," he said, his voice tinged with gratitude. On the 6th day, I received a call from Ryan. His voice was cheerful, almost oblivious to the weight I'd been carrying. "Hey, how's everything going?" he asked. "Fine," I replied tersely, not trusting myself to say more. "Great, we're having a fantastic time here. The beach is amazing." As he went on about their holiday, I felt a surge of anger. Here I was, handling a situation that should have been a shared responsibility, while he was enjoying himself without a care in the world. When the call ended, I resolved not to let resentment consume me. Instead, I channeled my energy into making Walter's remaining days as comfortable and meaningful as possible. On the last evening before Ryan and Clara were due to return, Walter called me to his side. His breathing was labored and his eyes looked glassy, but his grip on my hand was surprisingly strong. "I need you to promise me something," he said. "Anything," I replied, tears welling up in my eyes. "Live your life for you," he said. "Don't make the same mistakes I did. And tell Ryan. Tell him I'm proud of him." I nodded, unable to speak. That night, Walter passed away peacefully in his sleep. When Ryan and Clara returned the next day, they were shocked and grief-stricken to find Walter gone. Clara wept uncontrollably, while Ryan clung to me for support. As we prepared for the funeral, I shared some of the stories Walter had told me, as well as his final message for Ryan. It was a bittersweet moment, filled with both sorrow and a newfound sense of connection. In the days that followed, I found myself reflecting on everything I'd learned from Walter. His courage to open up, even in his final days, had given me the strength to confront my own fears and desires. Though his passing was a profound loss, it also felt like a turning point, a chance for me to reclaim my own life. Months later, I visited Walter's grave, holding a single white rose. As I placed it on the headstone, I whispered, "Thank you for everything." Walter's legacy wasn't just the stories he'd shared or the lessons he'd taught me. It was the reminder that life is too short to live for others' expectations. His final days had been a gift, not just to him, but to me as well. And as I walked away, I felt a sense of peace, knowing that I was ready to embrace my own journey on my terms. "You said